Welcome to Inspired Living with Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. Every Wednesday, Marc, along with his special guests, will explore thought-provoking topics and ideas that promote creativity, self-help, healing, happiness, and well-being to inspire you on your spiritual journey. Each week, Marc will discuss different paths to achieving a more spiritual, balanced, happy, and healthy lifestyle. Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual. Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. Marc is a tested, certified, and professional spiritual medium, metaphysical teacher, healer, and spiritual advisor with a spiritual practice based in Seattle, Washington. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
And Carl Jung reminds us, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in this beautiful, awakening, transformative planet of ours. This is another episode of Inspired Living Radio. I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we try to come in Wisdom Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and we're an internet radio show, so we're broadcast all around the planet. No username, no membership, no passwords, no BS. So today we're going to be welcoming in our very special guest for the first time. He's best-selling author John Purkiss, and he has an inspiring chat to share with us this hour of learning to let go and drop everything that's holding us back. It's actually a great little read and journal and exercise book. I've been glossing over it the last few days, and it really is just about how to drop everything that's holding you back. So if you want to follow us on our social media platforms, you can do that a couple different ways. You can join our very rapidly growing Facebook page, which is called Inspired Living Radio and Podcasts. You can also join us over on Instagram and Twitter under the handle Inspired For Us. That's the number 4. You can also learn more about the show over on TikTok or marclainhart.com. And if you are interested in learning more about what we do, or you have ideas for the show, we have a community page where you can submit those ideas as well. And we try to bring topics and ideas based on what our inspired listeners are looking for. And this was one of them. So we're going to take this next hour to learn to let go with John Purkiss, and just a little bit about John and his journey and how he got here, because we don't just get here overnight. There's usually a story that precedes such transformation. John studied economics at Cambridge University, and he began his career in banking in London and Chicago. He completed his MBA at INSEAD in France, where he won his first prize. John was then diagnosed with clinical depression, which nearly proved to be fatal. And having understood that intelligence and hard work did not guarantee happiness and success, he began to look for solutions. While working in the UK, Belgium, and France, he was living in Paris when he finally learned to be present, to let go, and ask to be guided. His life suddenly changed for the better. John was soon in the perfect job in London, achieving his financial goals with ease. He then learned transcendental meditation and began to write. However, he realized that everyone was stuck in one way or another, whether it was in the areas of health, wealth, or relationships. Finally, in 2014, he met his guru, from whom he learned the completion technique described in this book, The Power of Letting Go, and Learn to Let Go, a guided journal. If you want to learn more about John, you can visit our information on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our Instagram page, but you can also go to johnpurkiss.com. And John, with that, we like to say, be inspired, inspire others, inspire before we expire. Welcome to Inspired Living, my friend.
Thanks for inviting me, Marc. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yep. Thanks for being here.
Great.
And let's have a chat about learning to let go. I think after this pandemic, a lot of people are going to be really interested in this topic about letting go, transformation. I did a few the exercises in the journal, and really I've been meditating for a long time. But for those that have never dabbled in meditation or mindfulness and learning how to go within, this book is going to be a real jumping off point for them, because the exercises are great.
Well, thank you. Some of them go back 10,000 years, so I've just put them in plain English.
Well, sometimes that's what we need, though, for this day and age, right? Just to put it into plain English, put it into layman's terms, put it into a way that people can gravitate to and understand, and really start to practice these modalities so they can have that transformation. So tell the listening audience around the planet how you came to write this journal and working through, clinical depression, which is in this day and age a very known thing that we're having discussions about all the time.
Yeah, it's a very serious thing. By the way, just to make life easier for listeners, it's Purkiss, Purkiss. But I when I was a child, people pronounced it all kinds of different ways. But yeah, in terms of going back to how it happened, so I had a very intellectual upbringing. So I went to a state school which was free, but it was a very high quality school and very academic, and so the kind of unspoken doctrine was that if you're intelligent and hardworking, you'd have a great life. And I think people in many countries around the world have had some version of that drummed into them one way or the other. And so it all worked fine until I got to the age of just before my 26th birthday. So as you mentioned, so I won first prize at business school and everything looked perfect. And then within about 3 months, I was waking up early and feeling suicidal, and I went to see 3 or 4 physicians, and they all said, you have clinical depression. So I just realized I've missed something fundamentally important here. And it took me quite a while to find the solution, because I was so, I'd spent such a long time basically thinking and working. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to where this book starts. If I remember correctly, I'm sure lots of people listening to this have read The Power of Now, which was published in 1997. Well, that's when it's published in the UK anyway. So it was 1996 when I was sitting in Paris, and nothing was working in my life. So I had no income. Paris was on strike, which happens quite frequently. So Paris was on strike, so you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't work. I had some sciatica, couldn't pay the rent. So it was like in one of those great self-help books where you reach rock bottom. And so I felt terrible, but at the same time, it was a bit like a sort of social science experiment, because I thought, well, on paper, I've been doing everything correctly, but in reality, nothing's working. So I'm clearly missing something. There's probably something, some switch I need to flick, and then everything will work. And I was reading a book. I don't know if you know him, but there's a book called, it's mentioned in my book. It's a book called The Rich Man's Secret, written by a man who lived very close to you on the West Coast. And it's a novel, and the character in the novel meets someone who just says things like, now knows, return to now, and all this kind of thing. So all I did was I kept returning to now. So every time my attention wandered to all the mess happening around me, I would just bring my attention back to the present. And the first thing I noticed was I felt better when my attention was in the present. And so that really helped. And then I realized that all this mental and physical effort I was putting in was getting me nowhere, so I stopped doing it. I just stopped. And what I noticed when I kept being present was suddenly my intuition switched back on. I think it switched off during my education. And I suddenly realized I could read my own emotions, and also I had a much better idea of what was going on with other people. And that's when my life started to change, because I'd wanted to work in recruitment for a long time, but I had no intuition. Now my intuition was switching back on. And also I decided, I was brought up as a Christian, but I left the church when I was 15. I just, for some reason, decided to let go completely and ask to be guided. And then a few days later, an advert appeared in the newspaper, and I got the perfect job. So I realized, having gone to church for 10 years, I understood there was something more intelligent than my brain that was running the universe. What happened when I let go completely was I suddenly tuned into it. It felt accidental. I don't think it is accidental, but the change was dramatic.
Yeah, I would say not just dramatic. I would say transformative, like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. But the only way to become the butterfly is through a severe transformative cocoon phase, right? Where the caterpillar deliquefies itself, literally reliquefies itself into something more beautiful and has a different perspective, right? The perspective of a caterpillar on the ground is going to be different to that of a butterfly in the air. So I would say transformative as well. That's what I found in my own journey. And you make a great recommendation, because Eckhart Tolle had a lot to do, and he wrote The Power of Now and the New Earth. And that journey of how we leave that analytical mind, the self-sabotager, the ego, leave it behind and move into that higher altitude of the air we breathe, that lighter air, that power of now, if you will.
Yes.
So I love that book. Great recommendation. And I would say, let's just start with, why do we need to let go, John? Why? Why?
Why do we
The
need
ego
to?
screams out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to define what the ego is, because a lot of people find that confusing. So, as you may know, the Western definition of ego is heavily influenced by Sigmund Freud, who was very recent. I mean, he died in 1939. And I mean, I work in business. Every now and then I meet someone who tells me they have a healthy ego. So the Western idea of the ego, as in Freud, is the ego is quite useful. Sure. It keeps the id under control, because the id wants to go and have sex with everybody or eat too much food or whatever, and the ego says this is a bad idea. But the Eastern view of the ego is different, as I'm sure you know. The Eastern view of the ego is that it's never ever helpful. And my guru has a long name, Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam. We call him Swamiji. What he says is that your ego is made up of pain patterns or incompletions or samskaras, or whatever you want to call them. So once we understand what the ego is, to answer your question, once we understand what the ego is, we can see where we need to go. So if we take, there are 8 billion people on the planet, and most people are living from ego because they have unresolved pain. So we can see it, for example, when there's violence in the world, or when people damage the planet or invade another country, whatever they do, it's because of internal pain which they have not processed. And when there are 8 billion of 8 billion of us, we start to crash into each other in a major way. And so what the letting go is ultimately letting go of the ego. And of course, once we've let go of it completely, we're enlightened. That's the journey we're all on, whether we realize it or not. I mean, does that make any sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, no, I think it makes perfect sense. And, one of the things that I do when I work with my students is I have them identify their ego. And I usually have them identify, because when you become aware of this ego or this concept, depending on if it's Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy, awareness is the greatest agent for change, and Eckhart Tolle teaches us that, right, in the book. So when you become aware of your ego and you put a name to it, a lot of times I have them think about a person, a place, or a thing they just don't like, and then associate that with the name of their ego. And it really is really about awareness. And it's interesting that you talk about Sigmund Freud, because there's a movie coming out on Netflix here, and then I think in the next few weeks. It's literally called Freud's Last Session, and it's actually starring Anthony Hopkins, and it's the session picks up with Sigmund Freud on the eve of the Second World War and the end of his life, as he invites iconic author C.S. Lewis to debate over the existence of God. And I grew up with C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, so I'm really looking forward to this movie and the insight and the philosophy and the debates that are going to be taking place.
Yes.
But as far as, back to this book, why, we define the ego, but why do we need to let go of it? What's the benefits of that?
I mean, I write purely from experience, so it's probably best if I just explain my experience. So
I love it.
So I had some idea about the ego, and I spent some time, with people who practice Kabbalah and Sufis, and I realized people in most traditions, well, certainly all the traditions that came from Asia, including what's now Israel, are they're trying to deal with the ego in some way, right? And then when I met my guru, I realized, okay, he has a specific technique to deal with it. So wonderful. So the way I would describe it is, so another word for ego is identity. So for example, if I try and live my life through my ego or through my identity, I am an executive search consultant because I recruit chief executives and finance directors. I am an author because I've written some books, whatever. I am a male, I am English, I am blah, okay? So we have this whole series of labels that makes up our identity, right? And my experience of trying to live that way is, at some point you just hit the buffers. And in my case, it happened when I was 26. Some people it's later, but at some point it just stops working, because it's a bit like you're a kind of small standalone computer, and you haven't plugged into the cloud or the or the cosmic mainframe yet, so you're severely underpowered, crashing into all these other standalone computers, sort of a 1980s PC kind of thing. And then when I go beyond the ego, for example, there's specific practices that I do. So the completion technique, which is in the 3rd chapter of The Power of Letting Go, is all about identifying the pain stored in my body, which is causing problems now, right? So to give an example, we all have a root pattern, which, and Freud said this, I did Freudian psychotherapist, we just didn't find a solution, but Freud said it, something very bad happens in your early childhood, and that kind of runs your life, right? So in my case, I've traced it all the way back to when I was 2 or 3 years old, and my mum put me in the barber's chair to have my hair cut, and I felt powerless and kicked and screamed and came to all kinds of conclusions about myself and other people. So something happens between 2 and 7, and unfortunately you can be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, and this pattern is still running your life, right? So the letting go process is getting rid of those patterns, and then that's chapter 3, and then chapter 4 is letting go completely, sometimes known as surrender, which a lot of people find scary, because if they think, well, if I surrender, my life will fall apart. And as you and I both know, when you surrender, everything falls into place. Yeah, right. It's a paradox. But so to answer your question, why do we need to let go? Well, we need to get rid of all the pain so we stop suffering. And secondly, when we let go completely, life happens beautifully, because there's something extremely intelligent. Well, if we look out the window, there's something extremely intelligent which is running everything. We just need to merge with it.
Well, and it's like what you just said about what the caterpillar calls the end of the world by that letting go and surrendering. Yeah. The butterfly calls, a whole new experience, a whole new perspective, if you will. And I'm glad that you said your guru's name. I did put his quote on our Facebook page, but I couldn't for the life of me pronounce his name. So thank you. I'm glad you took that approach.
Yes.
I was like, I'm glad he said that, because I'm not going to say it right.
Well, especially with my. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say with my American accent, I definitely won't pronounce it right, I'm sure.
It's actually quite. So it's Nitya, which is eternal, and Ananda means bliss, so it's eternal bliss. And I'm glad you like I haven't heard the butterfly metaphor in such detail before, but it's on the cover of the book. So thank you for giving me deeper insight into that. So.
The synchronicities, or as Einstein talked about, synchronicities are God's way of remaining anonymous. So yeah, that's definitely, if you get the book, and just for our listeners out there, you can go to our Facebook page, or you can go to John's website, and that was at John Purkiss. Purkiss. Am I saying?
No,
Purkiss.com. I apologize. To get that book. Is there other places that the book can also be picked up?
It's
digitally or Audible?
Oh, it's all on Amazon. Yeah, whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And bookshops.
All right.
Yeah.
And bookshops. So if you want to check that out, but yeah, on the cover is a great monarch butterfly. And as I'm looking at that, it's funny about awareness, because as I was reading the book, I was looking at the exercises and practicing exercises. I didn't even really pay attention to the cover until you actually said that. Isn't that funny?
Funny, yeah.
We were having a whole conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, there is a butterfly on the cover. So sometimes we don't see the trees through the forest, as the old saying goes. So in the book, there was a quote that I picked out, and it was and you had actually referenced William Shakespeare from Hamlet, and it says, quote, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so," end quote. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think for the listening audience, they're going to be like, well, what do you mean by that? There is no good or bad. I see bad stuff in our world all the time, and I see good stuff all the time. What was Mr. Shakespeare going after there?
Well, I haven't spoken to him recently, but I mean, the way I see my interpretation of what he's saying is good and bad are both labels. So we see things happening and we assign labels to them, and different human beings will assign different labels to the same phenomenon. So in the book I talk about labels, is you can get pretty stuck with labels. I think there's still, I still have a sense of right and wrong, in the sense of, I don't want to cause suffering. I think avoiding causing suffering is really important. And so I would tend to use that more than right or wrong. I think another aspect of it is, a lot of us, we have some experience and we label it as good, or we label it as bad, or right or wrong. And then we change our mind later. So for example, when I had clinical depression, it was incredibly painful. Fast forward to now, I see it as a blessing, because it was the beginning of the end of my ego. So which is true.
But at the time, it would be reflective as being like, hard or horrible, or the bad,
this
I guess,
is
perspective. Yeah.
It's just like total nightmare. Like, I've done all the right things and now I'm in this complete mess and I want to kill myself. So, but my perspective now is, oh, well, I was blessed that happened when I was 26 and not later. I mean, it happens when it happens, but I do see it as a blessing now. So that, I think that's my interpretation of what Shakespeare was saying. And I mean, the other aspects of letting go is one thing that Swamiji, I read it, he wrote a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and he said, if you surrender, your intuition will tell you what to do. If you let go completely, your intuition will tell you what to do. So my experience of that is, we don't get, if we're intuitively doing the right thing, we don't get into all these problems about good and evil and right and wrong and good and bad, because we're doing what's right for all concerned, and we're not creating pain or conflict. So it's an intuitive thing. It's not, we don't need to analyze it to death all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I bring that up in the chapter, because this is the chapter of letting go of judgments. Is I've learned in doing many shows in my own spiritual pathway and my own meditation that, spirituality is your ability to shift perspective. And I wanted to get your perspective on what you thought Mr. Shakespeare, even though you haven't talked to him in a long time, and he's over on your side of the pond.
That's right.
Still, but just to see your perspective of what, why did you put that quote in the book based on judgments? And I think if you drill down, it's a really cool perspective on your own journey, your own experiences that, it almost led you to commit suicide, to take your own life based on clinical depression, right?
Yeah, which is, I mean, one way of looking at it, which, one of my, Swamiji has lots of teachers, and one of them talks about, imagine a building with 100 stories, and most people start on the ground floor. And I said to him, well, in the basement is clinical depression, don't go there, right? And let's say the 100th story is enlightenment, right? And the way he describes it is, when you're on the ground floor, you can't see very far because there are hedges and there are lots of flies and all the rest of it. And as you go up and up and up towards enlightenment, on the top floor, 100th floor, the view is completely different, right? So I think, I presume that's what all of us experience. If we move up or down a few floors, the view is completely different.
Yeah, a room with a view. And, going back to the struggle, Brene Brown, I just posted about this. So I love how my podcasts line up with the energy and the synergy of what we're discussing today. And Brene Brown said this: you are imperfect. You are wired for struggle, but you are also worthy of love and belonging. So for my listeners out there, just remember, you are imperfect. We are wired for struggle, but we're also worthy of love and belonging. And, going down into that basement of the building that you just described, where clinical depression resides, that's where we have to shift our perspective and our focus and our energy and our intent. And a lot of times, Lao Tzu talked about this: be still. Stillness reveals the secrets of eternity. And that comes from, thousands of years of, sitting still, listening in the silence, moving into that breath work that you talk about in your book. So for the listeners out there, practice the pause. We don't grow when things are easy. We grow when we face challenges. In meditation, this book, Learning to Let Go, a guided journal, can help you to drop everything that's holding you back. So for the listeners out there, what would be, in your perspective, before we go to our first break here, what would be a couple, as we're prospecting today for the diamonds within and the diamonds within this book, what's one of your biggest reveals of bringing this thought process into my reality to be placed in my hands here with this book. What's something that jumps off the page that would be an aha or eureka moment for you on this book?
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Yes, sir.
sorry. I lost the trail there. Could you say it differently?
Sure. And if you need time to think about it, because I'm kind of
I was following along, but then I lost the question.
More or less the diamond of writing this book, the diamond within, the diamonds that are in this book. What's something that reveals to you after you took this thought process, put it into book form, so I can have it here in my hands today in the physical world? When it was done, what was something that revealed itself to you?
I see it when it was done.
When it was done.
I think what really struck me, because this book, when people ask me how long it took to write, sometimes I say 23 years, and sometimes I'd say 10,000 years, right? And Octopus Books did a fantastic editing job, and it was like, I don't know if you experienced this in your studies, like you go through something that appears incredibly complicated and confusing, and then at the end of it all, you realize actually this is really simple. It's 3 steps. And I just and I think this is true of any great spiritual truth is once you drill through all the confusion, it's very simple, right? So I have all these thoughts. I need to let go of those. Okay, I have this pain. I need to let go of that. There's a technique for that. And then thirdly, if I let go completely, then I drop my ego, and life is going to be much, much better. So I suppose the thing that really struck me was simplicity. And now with this journal, for those who don't know, I mean, the journal, the new book, is the same. Well, they took out 2/3 of the text of the first book and they replaced it with nice illustrations, I think it works almost better because you've got 1/3 as many words and it's made it even simpler, right? So I suppose to answer your question, it's once I really understand something, I just realize how simple it is. It was like that when I was it was the same when I was studying economics. Actually, it was I just once I'd gone through the whole process, it came out as simplicity at the end.
Oh, I love that. So we're going to put a little pin in that. We're going to go to our first break, and our only break today, and then we're going to come back after 2 minutes, and we're going to pick up this enlightening conversation with Mr. John Purkiss from over across the pond, talking about his book, Learning to Let Go, a guided journal, and drop everything that's holding you back. We'll be back here in 2 minutes. This is Inspired Living Radio.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
One planet, 7.3 billion people. Only one you. Life offers us many opportunities and learning experiences. Are you ready to explore and discover this beautiful planet, the life and energy all around us, the spiritual world, and what is unseen, along with your own personal soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, is the spiritual connection you have been prospecting for. Internationally known as a tested and professional clairvoyant medium and spiritual advisor, Marc's work as a metaphysical teacher, medical instructor, radio show host, inspirational writer, and hiking guide are here to help you on a journey of self-discovery, healing, inspiration, education, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Dare to dream. Dare to explore. Dare to live. For more information on Marc's spiritual practice in Seattle, Washington, please visit marklainhart.com or internet search The Intuitive Prospector.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
And welcome back to Inspired Living. Our special guest today, best-selling author John Purkiss, to have an inspiring chat learning how to let go. It's a guided journal, and it's how to drop everything that's holding you back. You can get that off of our social media pages, or you can go online at johnpurkiss.com for more information to get that. And what we're going to do, John, we're going to do something kind of interesting. Is I'm going to actually, I put the quote out of the book on our Facebook page, but I'm going to actually have you say his name as your guru, because I will totally crush it and make it wrong. But he talks about, quote, "You can live either in expectation or in gratitude, never in both." And that is by
Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam. Known as
Thank you.
Teamwork.
I would have to practice that a whole. Yes, teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. So let's continue this fascinating conversation about learning to let go and the steps that we can take. One of my mantras, and you talked about this earlier, John, is the experiences in our early childhood continues with us, and it's about the awareness and how do we change that. One of the things I like to say is repeat what we don't repair. And I know that biofeedback in my journey, I know that hypnotherapy in my journey, counseling in my journey helped me to become aware of some of the early childhood things that I went through that were quite traumatic and very negative experiences, and learning to let go of those, because those experiences didn't make who I am today. I mean, they may have put me on a path towards that, but that's not where I choose to go and repeat what we don't repair.
Yeah. Is that I can quote you on that, can I? Is that your formulation?
I picked that up. Yeah, I don't know if it's actually a quote of somebody that said that. It's just something I came across my journey. The other one that I love is the lesson repeats until it completes, and what we resist persists. Couldn't tell you who said it. It's just always been my mantras along the path. So,
yeah, interesting. No, it was great quotations. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll throw that quotation out for whoever owns that content. I have no idea.
Yeah. So what should we say about that?
Oh my goodness. Let's continue to talk about the book. Do you want to read from the book? I always like to have my guests read maybe a passage or do an exercise of the book that the listeners could actually
I can talk you through an exercise
and feel.
Yeah, I can talk through an exercise.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I was just enthusing about your quotation that I'm going to write that down. I have to write it down. So here's the essence of it, right? Which everybody can do. So if you think of, Mark, I'm sure you've done this before, but if you're listening to this, if you think of something in your life that's not the way you want it to be, so there's something area where you're stuck, or there's something that you're distracted or you're annoyed about, or whatever it may be, something that's not working for you, then what most of us do is we try and fix the outside world. We try and fix other people, which doesn't work. So what we do is we turn inwards and just observe this pain and just listen very carefully to ourselves, because you'll hear words about it. And most of us, when we look inwards, we can feel this pain, and it's stored somewhere in our bodies. So when I'm talking to people and let's say they're annoyed with their boss, or they've just had a row with their spouse or whatever, there'll be a pain, and the pain will be somewhere in their bodies. And usually it's like the heart chakra, or it's in the head or the stomach or somewhere. So that's the first step. And then you realize, actually, this thing is stored in my body. And then the second thing is I say to people is, okay, how do you feel? And they say, I feel frustrated, or I feel, life mistreats me, or I can't rely on people, or it'll be something negative about yourself, other people, or the world, or all three, right? So we have these cognitions about other people. This is a bit like software that you're running, and it's creating your reality. And Swamiji says there are like 4 or 5 thought currents which are basically running your life, and they've been there for years. And as I said, they're stored in your body. So then I just say to the person, okay, you have this feeling of, let's say, frustration. Okay. And my question is then, when did you first feel that way? And sometimes people can only remember back to, the age of 20 or the age of 10 or whatever. But you just go back as early as you can and find the incident, find the first time you felt that way. And Swamiji's instruction is very simple. It's 3 words. It's relive to relieve. So what we do is we take a mirror, one of those vanity mirrors,
I like that.
and look at yourself in the mirror and relive the thing at least 5 times intensely. And it's not remember, it's relive to relieve. So we become, for example, in my case, 2 years, 3 years old, I'm in the barber's chair, someone's trying to cut my hair, and I'm so upset and frustrated, and I relive that intensely, over and over and over again. And the reason we do this is because we've suppressed the original emotion, and it's stored in our bodies. So rather grotesque metaphor that Swamiji uses is it's like putting a carpet on a wound, right? So the infection just carries on. If we take away the carpet and we just relive this painful episode, it steadily loses its power over us, because, to use another grotesque metaphor, we're squeezing pus out of the wound and then it heals, right? And so I've done this with many things, and what happens is at some point it's almost like an electrical charge leaves my body, and I'm suddenly free of it.
Okay.
And for example, you and I talked about clinical depression. For me, that's like a book in a library. I can go and look at the book and put it back on the shelf, but the emotional charge is gone. And so everybody can do this. It's relive to relieve. I mean, the guru's job is to help you do that, but you can get started on your own and just relive intensely, and the pain will start leaving your body, and it will run your life less and less.
I like that. And from your perspective, John, what do you think that energy is? Do you think that's part of the chakra, the aura, that energy you described? What's your perspective on that? That's
well, essentially,
from anatomy and physiology.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically karma, K-A-R-M-A. It's karma, and so in one of his webinars, Swamiji says karma is the pattern in which you are stuck, and we're all stuck, right, until we do something about it. So, I mean, I don't know whether it's been documented physiologically, but we can certainly look inwards and find it. I mean, I think I've met one person ever who said he felt pain, but he couldn't locate it in his body, right? And he was a very cerebral person. Most people can find it, right?
Right, or point to it or location.
Yeah.
And that it reminds me, everything you're saying is just so true. And for our listeners, one of the quotes that I always come back to is the famous poet from the 12th century, Rumi, and he talked a lot about pain. And for many, many years, I didn't understand what he was trying to say, but he said the cure for the pain is the pain. And when you have to go through and relive that becomes part of awareness. And Max Dupree talked about this, that we can't become what we want by remaining what we are. And sometimes we have to face that to move into transformation and to find that diamond within. And one of the concepts I teach on and my own spiritual philosophy is we all have a diamond within, and we know that diamonds are created under extreme pressures. And some people can remain, just that piece of coal in the darkness and let the pressures just be as they are. But for many that I found in doing this show and my work and my writings, people want to reveal that diamond and all the pressures and experiences they've gone through, because they have something to share. Just like for you today, John, being on Inspired Living and sharing this wonderful journal with us to teach us in layman's terms how to let go. You're right, the philosophy's been around for thousands of years, but sometimes you need just this simplicity. And you talked about that. Simplicity, less is more, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you're just saying is very interesting. Eckhart Tolle in I think it's called A New Earth. He talked about the pain body, and when I read that book, it was the first of his books that I read, and I thought, what on earth is the pain body? And then when I met Swamiji, I suddenly experienced, okay, this is the pain body. My body's got pain in it from these early experiences, and this pain is running my life, right? And fortunately, there's this technique to get rid of it. So and so if we relive it intensely, we can actually get rid of it.
Yeah, and that's free will and choice, right? Living it, choosing to live it. That's where, a big part of this comes from. So with the time we have left, because these shows go by so very quick, especially when it's such an interesting and fascinating topic, what's another exercise that you could give to our listeners in real time that they could benefit from this exercise, but also getting this book?
Well, here's an exercise. Actually, this is something that I've learned since writing the book. So I've got an even simpler way. So it's in the book, but it's an even simpler way to do it. So the fourth chapter is about letting go completely. And essentially what we do, and people can do this right away. So what most of us are doing is we're trying to control our reality, right? We're trying to control what other people do. We're trying to control the situation in accordance with some agenda that we have, right? And rather obviously, quite a lot of people don't want to comply, right? It's one of my famous quotes from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He says, "Unable to comply." And the assumption behind that is that we need to control everything, right? And it's based on fear. Like, if I don't control everything, there's going to be a big problem. So letting go completely, or surrender, is the opposite, which is, okay, I'm going to let go completely. And Swamiji has a technique which I'm writing about for the next book called unclutching. And I'll describe it now. Is when you sit there, or whatever it is you're doing, a thought comes up, right? And what most people do is they make the unconscious choice to engage with that thought, right? So, for example, extreme case, you feel angry and you want to hit someone, so you hit them, right? Or you feel depressed, you have a depressing thought, so you feel depressed. And what most people don't realize is you made a decision to engage with that thought, right? And most people are doing this all the time. But you have another choice, which you can make at any time, which is not to engage with that thought. So when a thought comes up, and they always do, right? Thoughts keep coming up. You can decide, I'm not going to engage with that thought, right? And then another one comes, and you don't engage with that one either. And another one comes, you don't engage with that. And they're like bubbles in a fish tank. So you just choose not to engage with the thoughts. Now, for a lot of us, that feels incredibly lazy or neglectful, or, I'm not taking responsibility. But what you're actually doing is you're basically detaching yourself from your mind. And then what happens, this is a fascinating thing, and I encourage everyone to experience it, is when as I said, Swamiji calls it unclutching. You're basically not engaging with those thoughts. And this is what I did, 25 years ago, is when you stop engaging with those thoughts, what happens is that the intelligence which is running the cosmos runs your life and is unimpeded by all your mental junk. and another thing Swamiji said, I mentioned it earlier, he says, if you surrender, your intuition will tell you what to do. You will intuitively know what to do. So all this thinking is not necessary. If you're unclutched, if you let go completely, you instinctively know what to do. He also says in the same book, he says, surrender is enlightenment, then you will know the truth. And I'm still experiencing this. I still catch myself trying to control situations and thinking a lot, and then I just remember, unclutch, just detach myself, and then everything sails along. And I just naturally do the right thing at the right time. It happened actually, when we were preparing for the show, there are always some technical things that need to be sorted out, and I just unclutched, and they just all get worked out. Right? I don't need to go crazy.
And here we are.
And now it's working. So yeah.
Oh, I love it. Just for our listeners that are tuning in today, or you're catching this on another platform, because Inspired Living now is streaming through all your favorite podcasting platforms. This is what a simple reminder too that John's talking about. Less is more. Sometimes we can just stop, practice the pause, take in a nice deep breath, breathe and release anything that does not serve you, or breathe in things you don't want to be directly connected to, and that get into that flow and that release. And it really is a lot of truth that the only way out is in. And for just I'm thinking of some questions, like, is letting go the same as giving up? Like what you felt when you were in the basement with your clinical depression, was that letting go along the same lines?
No, it's a great question. So giving up, then they're totally different. So giving up is powerlessness. It's like when we give up, we feel that we can't control anything, and it's all hopeless, and we just stop trying, right? And most of us are familiar with that. Letting go completely, or surrender, is the opposite in a sense, because what we're doing is we're no longer living life from our minds. We're no longer analyzing, trying to fix things. And so what I've just described, when you just choose not to engage with these thoughts as they keep coming up, you choose not to engage, you just keep unclutching. What happens is the mind at some point starts to get a bit quieter. So if you do the completion exercise, which I've described, and you unclutch, you let go completely, what happens is the number of thoughts you're having goes down and down and down and down and down. So the mind gets naturally quieter and quieter and quieter, and you just know what to do next. And my experience is I actually do a lot more than I used to, because my mind is pretty empty. And so I can take tons and tons of action because I'm not constantly analyzing and worrying the way I used to, right? So to answer your question, right. I would say the outcome is the polar opposite of giving up. You actually take more action and get more done. But you're working with the cosmos. In a way, one way of saying it is the cosmos is flowing through my body, and it'll flow through yours if you allow it to. I'm talking to the listeners. If you allow this to happen, the cosmic energy or God or whatever will flow through you.
Yeah, I like that. It's and it's a reminder that we're all stardust, right? Carl Sagan talked about the unit. You're talking about the universe and our connection to, as we are learning about our universe in new ways every single day during our Roaring 20s. And I'm not sure who said this, but it talks about when you let go, you also create space for better things to enter into your life. So there's a space creation, I guess, that's taking place definitely. Because you're moving, or you're not purchasing or subscribing to these stressful, worrying, dramatic, ego-driven concepts, right?
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, this applies physically. So I don't know if you've had this experience, but I noticed, I studied economics, and one of the assumptions in economics is having more and more stuff is good. Well, I noticed after a while, actually, the opposite is true for me. I feel better when I have a minimum of stuff, right? The emptier my life is, the better I feel. And things happen much more easily when I don't have all this clutter.
Right.
So even physically creating space helps, right? Because then new things can happen, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. For some of the listeners out there, I'm just thinking I'm going to put my own perspective into this as a guy's perspective. When you use such words as letting go or surrendering, that may drive some fear-based energy, which, for just a reminder, fear is false evidence appearing real in my reality. But for some of my listeners out there, they're like, yeah, that's great that Mark and John are talking about these concepts, but it scares the crap out of me. How would you break it down and explain to move past that? Yeah. The word of surrender or letting go as not being something of fear or being scared about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, certainly. So actually, sometimes a bit of etymology helps. So surrender comes from the French word se rendre, as many listeners will know. And so and se is the self. So what you're doing is you're giving up the self. And this self is basically the ego, right? So surrender's got a bad rap in the West because it's like losing in battles or whatever. It's not that. It's about giving up this little self. And that's the key to the whole thing, because what we're afraid of letting go of this little self. If I let go of this little self that has this reputation and this little pot of money and this maybe car and this house and these family members, right? I've got this little life with all these little things in it, right? We're all afraid if we let go of that, then the life's going to fall apart, right? It's going to be terrible. And if you're I mean, I know in the it depends on your upbringing. If you've had some kind of religious upbringing, some kind of spiritual background, there's a whole load of people who understand, regardless of all the religious differences, there's something very intelligent happening, right? That's the way I look at it. There's something extremely clever going on in terms of the way the world works. It's not random. There's something very clever happening.
Right.
And the way I see it is surrender. Just we drop the little self and we tune into this enormous self, which is running everything. Now, of course, there are some people who are atheists and who are just adamant that there's nothing there and it's all random. And I would just say, well,
Right.
that means if you think there's nothing there that's going to help you, then it is all down to you, and it will be very stressful. I just encourage you to try it.
And lonely.
Yeah, and I suppose what we're saying is, I hope it doesn't happen to you, but in my case, I had to get to the point where I was completely stuck, and I just realized, I'm missing something here, because there are people with less education and privilege than me who are having very nice lives, and I'm suicidal, so clearly I've missed something. But it is scary until you, I think the way to look at it is, very simply, is there's something extremely intelligent running the cosmos. And when we let go completely, or we surrender, we allow that to run our lives. And once you get used to it, it's not scary at all. It's blissful.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like tuning into something, that first experience where we don't understand can lead us to fear, can lead us to doubt, lead us to a raised religion or a Hollywood movie that we saw, right?
Yeah.
So, it's definitely about facing your fears. I always say, if you don't risk it, there's no biscuit. If you don't leave the nest and learn to fly, you never will, right?
Yeah.
So we only have just a few minutes left, and I was curious. Let me just look at the clock here, because my producer will get on me. So we got about 4 minutes here, and I thought, if you have your book, do you have the book in front of you by chance?
Yep. Well, I have the
page.
I have The Power of Letting Go.
Page. Yeah, The Power of Letting Go. I was gonna say Learn to Let Go, because that's what I have in front of me.
Okay, no problem.
What I really enjoyed was page 107, the exercise about once you realize that you can be anything, you start to become whole. And I think that would be a great way to finish out the show, is to read through some of those concepts on page 107 about becoming whole for our listeners, and then have you back to do another part 2 of this.
Well, thank you. I can talk through that. You mean in terms of I can be good, I can be bad, I can be ugly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is
I
like
can be clever. I can be stupid.
Yeah. This is a preamble to the completion exercise, which we've just discussed. And I learned this. I spent some time with the late Debbie Ford, who did an amazing job of teaching the shadow, and I met her in London. So essentially, and I encourage people to do this in private. So what most of us do is we try to be very good, right? So her book was called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. We're all chasing the light, right? So we have this idea that I'm good, I'm intelligent, I'm kind, and all these things. And so what happens is we're trying to be one thing, and we suppress all the other stuff which we've labeled as bad. And this exercise is very simple. Is best to do it on your own. You just write down on a piece of paper. I can be good, I can be bad, I can be beautiful, I can be ugly, I can be fat, I can be thin, I can be greedy, I can be generous. And the point of the exercise is just to embrace all of those opposites, and it's a very healthy thing to do, because you just, like, for example, I have a high IQ. I can be incredibly stupid. Sometimes I can remember astonishing things. Sometimes I'm really forgetful. Sometimes I'm greedy. Sometimes I'm not. And it's that way for all of us, right? So if you write all this down on paper, I just find it's a very healthy way of getting it out of your system. And then if someone, for example, says to you, "You're stupid," okay, sometimes I'm stupid.
Okay,
fine.
Yeah, you're right.
No big deal.
Yeah, you're right. Well,
so
John,
that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being on and sharing your philosophy and your experience and your wisdom and your personal story to write this journal. Again, The Power of Letting Go, and then the journal, a guided journal of Learn to Let Go and drop everything that's holding us back or holding you back. You can also, John has a Facebook group called The Power of Letting Go, and again, you can go to johnpurkiss.com. I'm saying your name right finally, I
Perfect,
think.
thank you.
But let's, later, maybe this year, let's have you back and let's talk a little bit more about the power of letting go and continue these conversations. Because I think in our world where we're at, this is so beneficial, so transformative, and so healing. But thank you so much for coming in today and just sharing your wisdom with us, John. I really appreciate you. And you are the inspired and the inspiration for our listeners out there. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Until our next soul adventure together, listeners, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, and discover that diamond within. We'll see you for another episode of Inspired Living. Until that time, be kind, be caring, be compassionate. We'll see you again. Have a great time. Namaste.